In the midst of a war-torn battlefield, a human soldier makes a choice that will change everything. He saves a Kellinar child, an enemy's blood. Now trapped on an alien world, he must face the trial of destiny, where strength, mind, and spirit will be tested like never before. With the Kellinar watching, one wrong move could lead to death. But what happens if he survives? Will he become a hero, or a prisoner of a fate he never asked for? Get ready for a battle beyond the battlefield, where mercy becomes a weapon. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The battlefield was silent now, the sound of war replaced by the eerie hum of a dying world. Smoke rose from the remains of destroyed machines, their metal frames twisted and burnt. The ground was a patchwork of ash, blackened dirt, and the remnants of bodies, both human and alien. The war between humans and the Kellinar had ravaged the land, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. Ray, a human soldier, moved cautiously through the wreckage. He was tall and strong, his once shiny armor now covered in dirt and bloodstains. His face was grim, eyes tired, but alert. His rifle hung loosely by his side, the trigger finger relaxed but ready. The battle was over, yet Ray did not feel the relief that usually came after such a fight. Instead, a deep unease settled in his chest. He had learned long ago that on a battlefield, even when the fighting stopped, danger was never truly gone. Sometimes, the wounded waited just to strike. His boots crunched on the metal debris as he walked. Each step seemed to echo in the heavy silence, a reminder of the lives lost and the wreckage left behind. Ahead of him lay the remains of a fallen Kellinar warrior, a giant of an alien with 4 muscular arms and skin as gray and rough as stone. Ray didn't want this war, never had, but he was caught in the middle of it, just like so many others. His orders were clear: search for survivors, report back. Nothing more, nothing less. As he passed the alien's lifeless body, Ray's thoughts wandered. What kind of future would humanity have after this war? The devastation was unimaginable. Entire cities had been wiped off the map, and still the fighting raged on. No one knew if there would ever be a clear winner. It felt like everyone was just trying to survive, not win. But amid all the destruction, something caught Ray's attention. A sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible. Not the crackle of fire or the hum of malfunctioning equipment, not the clatter of boots or the wind stirring the ashes. It was a cry. Faint, but unmistakable. Ray stopped, his breath catching for a moment. It wasn't the sound of a soldier's pain, nor the battle cries of the Kellinar. It sounded wrong. It sounded like a child. He tilted his head, straining to listen. The cry came again, this time clearer, higher pitched and more urgent. Ray's heart skipped a beat. A child? But how? There were no Kellinar children here, not after the battle had torn everything apart. The Kellinar didn't keep their young on the front lines. No, this was impossible. No way, he muttered under his breath, his voice barely a whisper. But the sound was undeniable. The cry echoed in his ears as if calling to him, pulling him forward. Against his better judgment, Ray followed the sound. His footsteps quickened, moving past the wreckage of battle-scarred vehicles and twisted metal. He ducked beneath the burning wreck of a transport ship, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled area for the source of the cry. As he rounded the corner, the air thick with the stench of burning fuel and death, he found it. Crouched behind a broken engine, hidden beneath a piece of fallen metal, was a small figure. The alien child lay curled in a protective ball, her tiny body trembling. Her skin was the same gray as the Kellinar warriors, but her features were softer, more fragile. She looked nothing like the soldiers Ray had fought on the front lines. Her large eyes glowed faintly, filled with tears that glistened like starlight. Her breath was rapid and shallow, and one of her legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood oozed from a wound on her side. Ray froze. He didn't know what to think. A Kellinar child. Alone and injured, lying in the ashes of a war she should never have known. Her body was small and delicate, her arms thin and fragile. He could see the fear in her eyes, the silent plea for help. She didn't move, didn't try to escape. She just stared at him, wide-eyed, as if hoping he would do something, anything, to save her. He felt his heart clench in his chest. The orders were clear. Enemy survivors were to be tagged and left behind, especially the young. The general had been adamant. Kellenar children were raised to be warriors from birth. Even the youngest of them were dangerous, trained to kill before they could walk. But as Ray looked into the child's eyes, he didn't see a warrior. He saw a scared, lost little girl, one who had no place in this war. "You're just a kid," he said softly, his voice trembling with an emotion he didn't fully understand. The girl flinched at his voice, but she didn't run. She couldn't. She was too hurt, too broken. Ray knelt slowly, making sure his movements were calm, non-threatening. He didn't want to scare her, didn't want her to see him as the enemy. He reached out, his hands trembling slightly. He could feel the weight of his rifle against his side, the cold metal that had seen so much destruction. Slowly, he placed the rifle on the ground, his fingers carefully lifting the piece of metal that had trapped the girl. She cried out in pain, but Ray paused, letting her adjust. Then, gently, he picked her up. "I got you," he whispered softly, holding her light body in his arms. She didn't resist. Her small hand gripped his finger tightly, as if she knew he was her only chance of survival. As Ray carried her away from the wreckage, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change everything. His mission had been clear. Find survivors, report back. But now he wasn't sure what to do with the child in his arms. The battlefield was over, but the war was far from finished. "Report." His comms buzzed in his ear. It was his commander's voice, crisp and commanding. "No threats here," Ray said, his voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil he felt inside. He hesitated, then added, "Found something." "Bring it in," the commander replied. "The order final." Ray didn't respond. He ended the transmission, the weight of his decision sinking in. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the start of something far greater than any mission, and he had no idea what kind of consequences it would bring. The child in his arms was a spark, one that could either ignite a fire or be snuffed out before it even had a chance to burn. Ray's boots crunched softly on the gravel as he walked through the medical bay. The child was in his arms, her tiny form so light it felt like carrying nothing at all. Yet despite the weightlessness of her body, his heart was heavy with the burden of his decision. He had broken the rules. He had gone against everything he had been trained to do. He had saved an enemy's child. The soldiers around him whispered, their voices a low hum of uncertainty and judgment. Some of them stared openly, their eyes filled with suspicion. Others simply averted their gaze, unwilling to confront the strange, impossible reality of the situation. But Ray didn't care. He couldn't. Not with the girl in his arms. Not with the terrified, trusting look in her eyes. "You brought her here," a voice said from behind him, cutting through the tense silence. Ray turned to find Captain Weston, standing in the doorway, his face a mix of disbelief and concern. The captain's brow furrowed as he looked at the alien child, then back at Ray. "You broke protocol. This is a mistake, Ray." "She's just a kid," Ray replied quietly, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the words. "She's not part of the war. She's just a victim like the rest of us." Weston shook his head, disbelief still clouding his features. "You don't understand, do you? We're at war with the Kellenar. We can't afford to show mercy. Especially not to their children. They're trained to fight from birth. They're dangerous." Ray's grip tightened slightly around the child, the soft pressure of her small hand against his fingers grounding him. "She's not dangerous," he muttered. "She's scared, just like anyone else would be in her place." Weston sighed, his expression softening just a fraction. "I get it, Ray, I do, but this could cause a chain reaction. If the Kellenar find out we've taken one of their children, they'll retaliate. And not just against us. They'll go after everyone we care about. The whole damn galaxy could go up in flames because of one act of mercy. The weight of the captain's words hit Ray hard, but he didn't waver. He had seen enough death, enough destruction. He had been part of it all. But this child, this innocent being, deserved more, deserved a chance to survive. Maybe it's already too late, Ray said quietly, glancing down at the small alien girl in his arms. But I'm not going to let her die, not if I can help it. Weston stared at him for a long moment, his jaw clenched as though trying to find the words to convince Ray to see reason. But then with a sigh, he stepped aside, allowing Ray to pass. Just be careful. You don't know what you've started. Ray nodded, a quiet promise to himself and to the child in his arms. He would protect her, no matter what. Inside the medical bay, the atmosphere was sterile, the sharp scent of antiseptic filling the air. The medics worked quickly, their hands moving with practiced precision as they cleaned the child's wounds. She whimpered softly at their touch, but she didn't fight. Her large, glowing eyes never left Ray's face, watching him with an intensity that made his heart ache. She's not going to make it, one of the medics muttered, her tone grim as she worked. The blood loss is too much, she's already in shock. We're doing everything we can, but Ray couldn't bring himself to respond. He just stayed by the girl's side, his presence the only comfort she seemed to need. She was so small, so fragile. He had never seen a creature like her before, and yet in that moment, he knew he couldn't let her die. After what felt like an eternity, the medic finished cleaning the girl's wounds and placed her on a soft blanket. Ray sat beside her, watching as she drifted in and out of consciousness. She clutched his fingers tightly whenever she stirred, as though she knew that he was the only one who could protect her. The other soldiers kept their distance, whispering among themselves. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable, their stares filled with suspicion, but Ray didn't care. He had made his choice, and he wouldn't back down. She's not one of them, he said to no one in particular, his voice soft but firm. She's just a kid, just like any other child caught in the middle of this war. We can't just leave her to die. Weston's voice came from the doorway again, softer now, filled with a kind of weary understanding. I know you want to help, Ray, but this isn't just about her. It's bigger than that. The whole galaxy is watching. If the Kellinar think we're harboring their young, it'll escalate everything. Ray didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his gaze to the child, still lying quietly on the blanket. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, and she looked up at him, her gaze filled with a kind of trust he had never seen before. She was terrified, and yet she reached out for him as though he were the only thing that could save her. You're safe now, Ray whispered, his voice trembling slightly as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. I won't let anyone hurt you. The girl's small hand tightened around his finger in response, and for the first time since the battle had begun, Ray felt something stir inside him, something deep and unshakable. He had always been a soldier, but in that moment he realized that he was more than that. He was her protector. Outside the medbay, the sounds of the war raged on. The clatter of boots, the distant explosions, the harsh commands of officers, all faded into the background as Ray focused on the child in front of him. The world outside didn't matter right now. All that mattered was keeping her safe. But even as he vowed to protect her, he knew that the consequences of his actions were only beginning. The Kellinar would come. They would demand their child back, and when they did, Ray would be faced with a choice: give her up to the enemy, or fight for her, even if it meant sacrificing everything. This isn't over, Ray whispered to himself, his voice filled with determination. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The child in his arms had already changed everything. Now Ray just had to find out what came next. The night stretched on like an endless shadow, the only light coming from the dull glow of distant stars and the soft hum of the ships that moved silently through space. Ray sat alone in a quiet corner of the medbay, his back against the cold metal wall. His eyes were fixed on the small figure lying in the bed across the room. the alien child he had saved from the battlefield. Her name was still a mystery to him, but he had begun calling her Sila, a name he thought might bring some sense of comfort in the chaos. She hadn't spoken much since he carried her to safety, but her eyes, large and full of fear, never left him. It was as if she trusted him, a human soldier, more than anyone else in the room. Outside the med bay, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Ray didn't have to look up to know who it was. Colonel Jensen, his commanding officer, approached the door and stepped inside, his face a mixture of concern and frustration. He had been silent for days, but Ray knew the pressure was building. The moment they found out about the alien child, the military's orders had shifted from finding survivors to handling a diplomatic nightmare. They couldn't risk the Kelinar, discovering that one of their children had been saved, especially not when tensions were already high. "Ray," Jensen began, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk." Ray didn't answer right away. He just sat there, his eyes still on Scylla. The silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating. "About what?" Ray asked finally, his tone barely more than a whisper. "About the child," Jensen replied, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the girl in the bed. "You know what you've done, right?" Ray looked up then, meeting the colonel's gaze. He could feel the weight of Jensen's words hanging in the air like a sword ready to fall. He knew the consequences. He had been told time and again what the Kelinar were capable of. They were ruthless, and their enemies, particularly human ones, were not to be spared. The fact that he had defied orders to save a Kelinar child was not just a mistake. It was a rebellion. "I couldn't leave her," Ray said simply, his voice steady but filled with an emotion he couldn't quite explain. "She was just a kid, and she didn't deserve to die out there." "She's not just a kid, Ray," Jensen said, his voice growing sharp. "She's the enemy, a Kelinar, and now we have a bigger problem on our hands. The Kelinar are a proud race. They won't just forget this." Ray nodded, but his gaze didn't waver. He had seen the coldness in the Kelinar warriors. He had fought them for years. They were merciless, their loyalty to their cause unwavering. But in this moment, looking at the small child who had clung to him for survival, he couldn't see the enemy. He saw a child who was scared, injured, and alone. "So what happens now?" Ray asked. "Are we supposed to hand her over? Return her to them?" Jensen hesitated. He looked at the girl in the bed, his face darkening. "That's what we're supposed to do," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of duty. "But you know that if we do, it will start a war. The Kelinar will come for her, and they'll come for us. We won't survive this." The words struck Ray like a blow. The reality of what he had done, the consequences that were now set in motion, came crashing down on him. The thought of handing Scylla over, of giving her back to the Kelinar, made his stomach twist in knots. He couldn't. Not after everything they had been through together. But at the same time, Ray knew that he couldn't keep her here. Not forever. The Kelinar would find out. They always did. And when they did, it would be his life and everyone's around him that would be at risk. "We can't just give up on her," Ray said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "She trusts me. She needs me." Jensen looked at him, for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then without a word he turned and left the room. The door slid shut behind him, leaving Ray alone once again with his thoughts. As the night wore on, Ray sat beside Scylla's bed, unable to shake the feeling that something bigger than just this moment was at play. He had saved her. Yes, he had broken the rules, defied orders. But there was something more. The way she looked at him, the way her small hand had gripped his finger in her moment of fear. It was as if their fates had been tied together. He didn't know why, and he didn't know what would come of it, but he couldn't turn back now. There was no going back to the soldier he had been before. Later that night, in the silence of his quarters, Ray's communicator buzzed. He answered, it reluctantly, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. "Ray?" The voice on the other end was sharp, clear, and unmistakable. "This is Matriarch Zanara. I am watching you." Ray's heart skipped a beat. The voice was cold, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something far more dangerous. Matriarch Zanera was the leader of the Kelenar, the one who ruled over them with iron fists. She was a powerful figure, a warrior, and one who would not take kindly to the fact that her daughter had been saved by a human soldier. "You have my blood," Zanera continued. "You saved my daughter, and for that, you will pay the price." Ray felt a chill crawl up his spine. He didn't know what that price would be, but he could feel it in his bones. Everything was about to change. The web of fate that had been slowly weaving itself around him had just tightened, and there was no way out now. "What do you want?" Ray asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "You will come to me?" Zanera's voice was cold, final. "And when you do, you will choose. Your life, or hers." The transmission ended abruptly, and Ray was left alone with the weight of the decision that had just been placed on his shoulders. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain: this was far from over. Ray stood at the edge of the dark stone pit, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The air was thick, carrying the smell of the wet earth beneath his feet, mixed with the faint scent of something ancient and dangerous. He could feel the weight of the alien world pressing down on him, the very ground beneath him seeming to pulse with a strange, eerie energy. This was the Kelenar homeworld, a place unlike any Ray had ever known. It was far from the familiar battlefields of his own world, a place where warriors fought with metal and guns. Here, the trials were different. Here, strength was not just physical, it was a matter of will, of spirit. He had come here under a strange summons from Matriarch Zanera, the leader of the Kelenar, after saving her daughter. The Kelenar were known for their merciless ways, and now Ray was being forced to prove his worth. His actions, his compassion, had led him into a situation far beyond what he could have imagined. This was the trial of destiny, and he had no choice but to face it. Failure would mean not just death, it would mean dishonor, disgrace, and a broken bond that could not be repaired. The arena before him was vast, its walls lined with ancient symbols carved deep into the stone. Warriors from all walks of Kelenar life gathered around, their eyes cold and unblinking, watching with the silence of ancient judges. Ray stood alone in the center, stripped of his armor, his body clothed only in a simple battlecloth. There were no weapons in his hands, no armor to protect him. The only thing he could rely on now was his mind, his speed, and his adaptability. At the top of the pit, Matriarch Zanera watched from a high ledge. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, filled with a cold respect for the trial ahead. The Kelenar were a proud species, and in their eyes, this trial was more than just a test of strength. It was a test of worth. To save her daughter had been an act of mercy, but mercy meant little without strength to back it up. Ray didn't know what to expect. He had heard rumors of what happened in the trial of destiny, but no one ever spoke of it in detail. The warriors before him, their faces marked with the scars of past battles, were silent as they waited. Ray could feel their eyes on him, judgment burning into him from all sides. He clenched his fists, trying to steady his nerves, knowing that his every move would be watched, scrutinized. The trial began without warning. The sound of a horn echoed through the arena, deep and resonant, shaking the very air. The ground beneath Ray's feet shifted, stone slabs moving to form a new shape, and with it came the first challenge. 3 warriors, tall and armored in bone-like plating, stepped forward from the shadows. They were silent, their expressions hidden behind masks, but their presence was undeniable. They were the first test, a physical challenge, a test of Ray's ability to survive. The warriors moved with a fluidity that was both terrifying and beautiful. They attacked as one, their blades cutting through the air in a blur of motion. Ray didn't have time to think. He had to move, and he had to move fast. The first warrior's blade came at him in a wide arc, and Ray ducked just in time, rolling across the slick stone floor. The second warrior was already there, his blade aimed directly at Ray's chest. Ray didn't hesitate. He grabbed a loose staff that had been left in the center of the arena, using it to block the incoming strike. The force of the blow rattled his bones, but he didn't let go. He used the staff to push the warrior back, forcing him to stumble. Before the warrior could recover, Ray struck, sweeping the staff low and knocking the warrior off balance. The third warrior lunged at him, but Ray was quicker, using his opponent's momentum against him, sending him crashing into the pit's walls. The first test was over. Ray was bruised, panting, but alive. The Kellinar warriors didn't move. They stood still, their eyes watching him closely. There was no applause, no celebration, only the silent weight of their judgment. But Ray wasn't done yet. He had survived the first test, but the trial was far from over. The air in the pit began to thicken, and the ground seemed to shift once again. This time, the walls of the arena opened and a thick green fog poured in, swirling around Ray's feet. He could barely see, the mist blurring everything. His breath quickened as his senses were assaulted by the strange, suffocating atmosphere. The voices came next. They weren't real. He knew that. But they sounded so real, so clear, that they stopped him in his tracks. His mother's voice called to him, soft and familiar. His brother's laugh echoed in his ears. The voices of the soldiers he had fought alongside, those who had died in the war, came next, each one whispering doubts into his mind. "You don't belong here," one voice said. "They'll never accept you," another warned. "You're just a man," a third hissed. Ray felt the weight of the words pressing down on him, the suffocating fog curling around his body. His knees trembled as he fought against the fear. The voices twisted his memories, his failures, his regrets. They tried to pull him under, to break him. But then, a soft voice, familiar and soothing, cut through the noise. "Zahar," it whispered. Sila's voice. Ray's eyes snapped open, his mind clearing for a moment. He remembered why he was here. He wasn't just fighting for his survival. He was fighting for something bigger, for Sila, for the bond he had promised to protect. He couldn't let the voices of the past control him. Not now. With a surge of determination, Ray stood. The fog around him seemed to clear, the voices fading into nothingness. He walked forward step by step, pushing through the darkness until he reached the light at the edge of the pit. The trial of the mind had been passed, but the final test was yet to come. The ground beneath him shifted once again, and from the earth itself rose a creature. Tall, massive, and terrifying. It had no metal, no armor, only bone and muscle. It was a creature of pure instinct, designed to kill. Its forearms reached out, its 6 eyes fixed on Ray, and it charged. Ray didn't run. He had no time for fear. He used everything he had learned from the previous trials, everything he had learned about his own humanity. He didn't fight with rage. He fought with precision, using the environment, using his agility. The creature was massive, but it was slow. Ray was faster. He ducked under its wild swings, climbed its back, and struck at the vulnerable joints beneath its skull. With a final blow, the beast collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The trial was over. Bloodied and exhausted, Ray stood. In the center of the arena, the Kellinar warriors watched in silence, their faces unreadable. At the highest ledge, Matriarch Zainara descended, her eyes fixed on him with something like respect. But there was no smile on her face, no sign of warmth. This was not about friendship. This was about survival. "You passed," she said, her voice cold but not without recognition. Ray's heart pounded in his chest. He had done it. He had survived. But now everything was about to change. "So now what?" Ray asked, his voice steady but tired. "Now everything changes," Zainara replied, her eyes locked on his.